I'm David Clayton, and this is the Way of Beauty podcast, conversations on Catholic faith and culture.
Hello, this is episode 41, and this is the 8th talk with Paul Jernberg, the composer and musician. And last time we went through 7 principles by which we can introduce these ideals into parishes. And I'll just list these now, and Paul can correct me if I go wrong. And we began to talk about some specific situations, but we're going to go into more depth about the different sorts of parishes that you might come across, because how you introduce these, if I understand it, depends on where you've got to go from where you are. And so the method of introduction will vary. But these are, and I'll let you come in after each one and correct me. So the first one is cultivate the proper disposition. So it's about the dignity and bearing and humility of not just the pastor, but the choir, everybody visible. And as a layperson in the pew, this is something I can at least sort out for myself.
Exactly.
Regardless of what the situation is, even if I have no control over anyone else or anything else, I can do that.
That's right. And I'd add profound reverence to the list.
Profound reverence, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Second, if we are going to be do something that is sudden, and this is, you are pretty firm on this, it's cleanse the liturgy of anything that is unorthodox, heterodox, if you call it, so anything which is heretical, anything which is clearly contrary to what the liturgy ought to be, that has to go. So we're not talking about matters of modification and taste according to the ideals of Pius X. We're talking about things that are clearly contrary to the teachings of the Church. And there are hymns in hymnals which do this. We're not, and you use the example of the extreme case of somebody singing Elvis songs for the processional or something like that. So that's what has to go. Not appropriate for the liturgy for Elvis fans. Sorry about that. 3, find the musicians, find the right people who with whom you can work with, because if we're constantly battling with people within the choir, then we're not going to persuade people beyond that of the validity of this. So it's worth sacrificing some skill, if you like, in musicianship, to get the right attitude from the people. You've got to have a team. This is sort of man management, I think, if I could use that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Number 4, think of the music director as a facilitator. In other words, as I was listening to you, you're saying it's a plea from music directors. Please judge this on the end results, not on the activity that you see me doing, because there can be too much emphasis on making sure the music director is working all the time, and he or she feels that their position is in jeopardy if they're not always doing everything.
That's right.
And so recognize that this is as much a managerial position as it is a doing position, and that ultimately the goal is to change the music. So if there isn't progress musically, then that's a legitimate criticism.
Exactly.
But that is what we're aiming for. And do this, he or she can do this as much by facilitation and guidance of other people in the congregation as by actually doing it himself.
Right.
So music director as facilitator. 5, recognize that the worshipping congregation, worshipping parish, is part of the body of Christ, and each has their role, and each is worshipping fully by fulfilling it. So we don't have the situation where the choir sings and then goes to Mass on another occasion to fulfill their obligation. We shouldn't see that as necessary, which I've heard people describe, that every role should be a fully participant in that worshipping body.
Right. And exactly, and particularly the coordination, you might say, between the priest and the musicians, the choir, needs to be very well unified, so that not two separate things from which we're distracted from one to the other, but really a unified approach.
And then number 6, that as we introduce these changes, possibly gradually, that people do have a sense of the path by which we're moving towards the ideal.
That's right.
Now, I can imagine that you can't chart it out in minute detail, but at least give people a sense of the method in your madness, that these are the building blocks, this is what we're aiming to do. And so that then people are on board with it. Is that right for that point?
That's right. We really do need to take steps forward in this path, and that to, as you say, to make clear to the people and the parishioners that this is a glorious thing we're working towards. It's not merely being correct, but it's headed towards something that is profoundly beautiful and deeply satisfying to our soul.
Right. And then to aid that, point 7 is give people an experience from time to time of that ideal by having specific events in which you devote more time and effort. Maybe I'm imagining even bringing in other musicians or something like that, so that they have a sense of what we're aiming for. I've been to some of these wonderful churches, so I always have that in my mind. You've been to places where these ideals might even be realized every week.
That's right.
But many people don't have that. They don't really know. I know what we're aiming for because I've got that experience. But many people haven't yet had that opportunity.
That's right.
So we want to bring it to them so that they know what they're aiming for.
Exactly.
And so put an effort in for the occasional larger scale event, if you like, but if you're going to do that, it's got to be good. It's got to really give people a sense of the ideal.
That's right.
It's going to work. Okay. Now we go back to this fascinating example, which you gave us. You tantalized us last time, or maybe I did by not allowing you to complete this. We have this situation where, and I've heard people describe very similar situations in another parish. Actually, it really did resonate with me as you spoke. A church which really, in many ways, by virtue of the style of its worship, looks like an evangelical parish. It's very, very energetic, very upbeat, lots of noise and participation, and seems on the face of it, if you measure contributions to the collection,
yes,
for people that are coming, very successful. And so the question that was put to me, why doesn't this work? Why should we change this?
Exactly.
So let's go back let's go back to, so how, first of all, what's wrong with that? And second, I've got some ideas, but I wanted to hear you articulate them probably a little more diplomatically than me. Right. But and then second, how can we convince people that there is something better?
Right. So in a way, we've already covered what's wrong. You might say is wrong with it, in the sense that we've talked a lot about the character of sacred music, and the many different aspects of traditional sacred music, and how we need to somehow continue those to a certain extent, in order that the music of the liturgy can truly draw us into the mystery, not merely satisfy our emotions or make us feel good, but really the music needs to have this capacity to draw us in to the depths, you might say, of the liturgy. And that's where we might say that some of the more contemporary music might very well, I think it does have its place. I don't have a gripe with praise and worship music as such. But
not in the liturgy.
Right now, go ahead.
But you presumably, we're not saying it's appropriate for the liturgy.
That's right.
You're
But I
saying
think
in the grand sort of scheme of music that for Christians, it has its place, but not in the sacred liturgy.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think we've sort of dealt with a lot of the reasons for that earlier on in our talks earlier.
Yes.
So
yeah,
I'd like to talk, if I may, about what to do in that situation.
I'm going to come, before we do that, I'm going to come in and make some, I have thoughts about this, that as to how you might convince people there's a problem. Because I still think that actually, even if we if we show them what ought to be there, they're still going to say, well, I don't care. This
Exactly.
is,
oh yeah, no.
This is wonderful. We have all these people, and people are coming to, and what I would say is that if we're to trust the church and her guidance and her traditions, then I'm not denying any of the good that your church has. But what I'm going to say is that it's good, first of all, either because there are other things in place which are attracting people. And if it's bringing them to Christ, it's because of those other things. Secondly, if it really is just the music, then it's not enough to attract people. You have to attract them to the right place. And if it really is just the music and we trust the church, then even if they like it and they feel good, it's not taking them to the place where they ought to be as Catholics and as Christians in church. And in this case, the good might be the enemy of the best. And so I would say to those people, this could be even better.
And I think you have to take that
experience.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take a risk here that I often think that this is a mistake. That's, for example, I deal with when I'm talking to people. I live in the Bay Area, and I will occasionally, as a Christian, be challenged on my views on homosexuality and gay marriage. And I will say it's wrong. And they will say, how can you be so cruel? How can you be so, how can you deny me my happiness? And I would say, I'm not denying you your happiness, and I'm not denying what you feel and the goodness of what you get from your relationships and the love that you feel. I'm not denying any of that. But what I'm telling you is that I believe, as a Catholic and a Christian, that there's something even better on offer. Think of all the good that you get from your personal relationships. It is better if you have the fuller relationship with God as a result of making that sacrifice in your life. And I think a similar approach, without telling people they've got it wrong, which we may say, but why does it matter? The answer is, we can be happier and more fulfilled and actually authentically attract people to Christ. We're talking about the parish, but for each person, your life will be better. This is why ultimately it's about happiness and joy, and it'll be more authentic, even better than it is.
Right. So in a way, I think my approach here is, and of course, if we assume that the priest is living a holy life and he's really committed to the way of wisdom, and his team is also on board with this, and they're praying and they're open to the kind of formation we're talking about, they're all open to these principles, then they're going to be the ones who will be inspired to go in a good direction. But these are, so in a sense it's hypothetical, but now I'm imagining that I'm on that team, or that I'm that team. And I'm going to, so I think before I'd even say the things you just said, which I agree with, I would say, let's begin to see what we can do that will present the glory of Catholic sacred music to these to our parishioners in a way that, like you say, that they're going to see this is something even better, that's
Yes.
step forward, that they have the opportunity to experience and to integrate into the liturgy. So, and this particular parish, especially where they've got this constant overflow of money, is an ideal situation to bring in for example, to have a liturgy, start out with just a single event, for example, where you bring in a choir and do something that has great beauty and depth to it, that is really in organic continuity with our traditions, that is that all the things we've been talking about, and let people come and experience that, and not even push it at first. Just say, look, we just want to share this with you. My experience has been, and having worked with all sorts of different groups of people, that when people have been, when I've had the opportunity to do that kind of event, typically the people who you would think are not open to it are in tears because of the beauty of it.
Yes.
Now, of course, you're going to have exceptions. You'll have people that don't want anything to do with it, of course. But there's such a power with good sacred music done well and from the heart and with great with skill and with spirituality. There's such power in that I would, I think this could be a great first step for such a parish. And then I would say, so the whole point, in a way, to my approach is saying, let's go step by step to present these realities that people need to become aware of. And then, little by little, we can also look at things like, how about doing the introit? Maybe we have an opening hymn too. I don't know. Now, I know there's a question of congruity here, because you can sometimes, if you put a praise and worship song and then a chant, it can be it can be a little jarring. So that question needs to be addressed as well. But let's say that we have one mass. Maybe we do all the propers, but we do them really well. I think little moments like this can light a fire and help people to go forward. Another thing that we didn't talk about recently at length, that is it's really important to mention it, even though it might seem a little bit of a tangent, is the aspect of acoustics and sound systems and so forth. Because I think this is another reason why, another problem, you might say, with some of the contemporary music, that it's so dependent on sound systems. That we're often bombarded by artificial sound that can be, for a person who's really sensitive to this interior dimension, you might say, of liturgy, it can be very upsetting, because when something seems to be unnatural, or if you feel assaulted by the sound coming from the speakers near you, this can also be a real hindrance to entering into the mystery. And so there are all sorts of places where you cannot simply take away the sound systems. But what can be done in a place like this is to really work towards minimizing it, so to speak, or making it as natural as possible. Those are some of the things that I see, and I think it's basically sort of reiterating what you've said, David, in terms of we're always going to show something. We're going to expand rather than simply eliminate. And by expanding people's vision and their understanding of the beauty of sacred music, we're going to be able to hopefully lead them step by step in a good direction. And yep, that's pretty much what I have to say there. Of course, as we talked about first, the whole idea of proper dispositions, I've got to assume right now that those are I'm going to assume that those are in place. If they're not in place, that really is the work of the pastor, and on a larger scale of the bishop, to be working on this aspect of how we approach the Mass and the dispositions we have.
Yeah. This question of support, we won't get to. Let's go to the next example.
Okay.
We may deal with this later.
And I just want to put in a little plug here too, because we have here in Massachusetts, we have our Cor Unum chorale, which has been in existence since 2016. We've sung various events. We've sung the Divine Liturgy, sang by Roman Herco. We've done, recently did a recorded filmed Mass, Votive Mass of the Holy Spirit. And so we are actually, to a certain extent, available to come and work with parishes and to offer these kinds of experiences.
So that actually might be a good point to mention, that they can contact you through magnificatinstitute.org.
That's correct.
And also, feel free to contact Paul. I mean, you can contact me as well, but on these issues, Paul's going to have more to say, I think. I've got lots of things to say, but I don't know how good they are on this. So I've got opinions on everything. I always do. But you can contact myself or through thewayofbeauty.org, or Paul, especially good on these issues, magnificatinstitute.org. And we'd encourage you to make comments on the YouTube channel or on the thewayofbeauty.org. Just make points, ask questions, and it's very interesting because no situation is identical to any other. There's always a special situation that, because we're talking about people who are unique, and there's as many situations as there are parishes, I'm sure.
That's absolutely right. It's a real joy. I mean, it sounds strange, but for me, it's a real, very stimulating and inspiring in a way to hear about situations that seem very difficult or even hopeless, because the question is, well, what can be done, and how can we help? And it's important to confront the reality of these different situations.
And we should say that this is the mission of the Magnificat Institute, isn't it? It's not only to educate via talks or podcasts, it's actually to give practical advice and help. And so we're looking for people to try and address these issues and make use of what's available.
That's right. So our next example is what both of us might very well call a success story. But I think it's important we bring it up because for various reasons. So this is another parish I know of in the eastern part of the United States that I have I'll state from the beginning, I have great admiration for this program. I've never been there, but I've heard about it from different people. And the music director is phenomenal. He's got an amazing amount of energy. He has, over the last 20 years, as far as maybe 25 years, he has developed many different choirs that continue to sing every week. He's got a scola. He's got another adult choir for those who have trouble singing or who are not quite ready yet for the scola, which is also thriving. It's I guess it's and this will give away for the people who know this parish, but the second choir is for all those. The qualification is they know how to breathe.
Oh God, that would be mine, I think. Go on.
They've got a boys choir for young boys. They've got a girls choir for young girls. They come together to sing together, but they practice separately for various reasons. They also have a choir for teenage boys whose voices are changing because they often fall through the cracks, so to speak. So at least 5 choirs. And each one of them is like, these people are filled with enthusiasm. They're going every week, and there's a whole spirit of learning involved. And everybody learns how to read Gregorian chant and how to sing Gregorian chant. They do beautiful polyphony. They do as well as the traditional repertoire, they also do new compositions. They sing hymns. They have all sorts of instrumental ensembles and soloists that play along with the liturgy. And the people, everybody I've talked to who's been to this parish tells me how it was a transformative experience to be part of this situation. So I bring this up to provide a sort of a very different situation of where a parish like this could possibly go. Is it, you know, are they all set? And I should also say that the organ in this parish is very important. They built a new organ for the parish. It's used prominently. The music director is an excellent organist. So in many ways, I just got to say, who's going to touch that parish? Who's going to say that they need to do anything different? It seems like there's so many good things happening. But the reason why I bring it up is, first of all, that I think, as we've said all along, we need to build on what's there. So certainly, if I were ever to be, have contact or be helping in any way, which I'm not expecting that I would be needed for that, but the first thing that is appropriate, seems to me, is just to rejoice in the greatness of what they're doing. It's on so many different levels. They're thriving, and among both the adults and the children, there's developed this whole culture of sacred music, and it seems like it's just contagious from generation to generation. It's almost now, because I've never been there. Of course, you get into a given situation. I'm sure they have their challenges and difficulties, but from all I've heard, it seems great. So the reason why I bring this one up, because it also, in a sense, I think it accentuates a certain principle. Because again, we might look at, as good as it is, this could be representative of several parishes around the country. And I've heard of other places also where there seem to be, really good things happening. And really, all that I would like to bring up here is that, as well as rejoicing and being very gratified by the good things, even in the best of situations, there is certainly, I'm pretty sure that this great music director,
Paul, you're gonna have to say it. You keep tell us how it could improve.
Right.
Qualify with how we
yes.
have to say it, I'm afraid.
Yeah. No, I think it's basically here. What I would say is the general problem, even in the best of situations, is the fact that we need to develop the sense of the propers. And I know they're doing propers to a certain extent, but in other words, this is typically the thing that's lacking in a great music program, not due to any fault on the part of the musicians, but simply because a lot of times it's because there's not enough compositions to fill in the gap. So I think in a place like this, if I were to be involved, I would say, let's continue to cultivate great compositions for the propers of the Mass, and as also new settings for the ordinary that can go even further in drawing people in.
If I can I'm just thinking about the summarize. So what you're describing, and I have no idea where you're talking about, so I can say this without worrying of offending anybody, but I really don't know where you're talking about. So what you're describing, if I'm listening to you, is a parish that has done phenomenally well in implementing what you might call the existing tradition within, with a focus on, I'm assuming, Gregorian chant and polyphony, but the important thing is that having done that, is that there's an awareness that this has to be a living tradition in which you have to discerningly incorporate new compositions, and especially with regard to the propers, is what you're saying. So
that's right.
Yeah.
And I think on another aspect also of moving forward in a situation like this, and would be, and because I've never been there, I've just heard about it from many different people, is to reach out. So if you have your act together, then I think it's a great opportunity and a need to see how can we draw more people, even more people in. So I think there I've seen some efforts to do things. Let's say go to the mall and give some kind of what do you call it, flash mob, or
yes. I'm a great fan of that. So that, in other words, this can draw people in.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I think this is something that is a touchy subject. I'm imagining, you see, that many parishes that focus on the extraordinary form particularly, they will have this sense that the goal is to capture what is traditional. They're looking at all the documents that have come out of the Solemn, and the propers as defined by Solemn and the musicologists, and they're doing this really well, and they're working towards it. But there's two things that always strike me when I approach these. One, that when they do, and I'm not thinking of this one parish because, as I say, I have no clue what it is.
Yeah.
What happens is that, first of all, the choices that they make outside those strict guidelines are not the best. And so there's an introduction of hymns, which are, the processional, the recessional, which frankly I just don't think should be there. Even though they are, and these are the efforts to sort of give the congregation a chance to sing along. This can happen.
Right.
And then also this belief that there is no need for anything new.
Right.
And the mindset, particularly of extraordinary form people, I know I'm going to offend some people, is that there's such a concern about changing things because of what's happened in the last 60 years. I mean, let's face it, the evidence is that many people don't know how to change things well. But one of the problems, one of the reasons we got ourselves into this situation in the first place, is that we became disconnected from the tradition because it was fossilized, because it really isn't a living tradition.
Right.
It will die again if we do not actually make it a living tradition in which there is openness to new composition and new material in the spirit of the tradition.
Right. And I think, again, yeah, this is our mission, really, isn't it? To not only minister to those who are the faithful parishioners already, but to draw in, to speak to our culture, and to evangelize through our music as well, in a way that really has the kind of depth and integrity and beauty that has the power to do that.
Yeah.
So.
And then, of course, the response might be, well, whose music am I going to choose? And that's a fair point. First of all, I'll say it for you. I think you should choose Paul's. But this really is a call to composers and to people, and to actually start to compose material. There's no reason why we can't have a flourishing of sacred music composition of the like that's happened in Elizabethan England, for example.
Right.
That we have God, we have people who understand music, we have the liturgy. All those elements are in place if we want to bring them all together. But we must aim for that as well. So those successful parishes, that's the first step. and that's wonderful, and that's fantastic. And basically, that really has to be what every parish aims for first, maybe.
Yeah.
At least as part of what they do. But then this discerning innovation, emphasis on discerning,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
is vital. If we don't, we can't pretend that it isn't needed. Otherwise, as the church as a whole, every parish was stopped at that point of simply recovering the tradition, it's going to die again.
That's right. I agree with you, David. And we all know that there's a whole movement, you might say, in the other direction, saying that's all we.
Yes.
And I think that's I think it's a very important point. Should we go on to the next parish?
Yes, please.
Okay. So now we come to what we might call the typical parish. At least in my experience, visiting different parishes around our region and around the country, this is how I describe it. You know, they use this, as far as the music is concerned, they use the standard contemporary settings and standard contemporary hymns that you find published by the major Catholic music publishers.
Yeah. And are distributed in missalettes, and they make huge profits doing it.
Not the musicians don't.
Musicians don't, but the publishing.
I don't know how much they make, but I'm somewhat familiar. I'm pretty familiar with the stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of it. I mean, this represents an industry, you know, over the last 50 years. Yeah. It's been sort of, I mean, and so in these parishes, you have people that basically, I think, as far as I can tell, out of goodwill, they're receiving what they've been given. You know, this is what they've been fed. This is what they understand it means to be Catholic and what it means to sing in the Catholic liturgy. And it's become a whole, you might say, culture, or in the sense that people have become so familiar with it as the way in which they worship. And so I would also go on to describe this typical parish as having one or more cantors. Typically they can sing in tune. Typically they will, you know, and they at the best they do a decent job of being a cantor. They lead the people. The music often, the lyrics are most often not liturgical, sometimes often biblical, but often sort of slanted, you might say, to emphasize the horizontal dimension of the liturgy. The community, as Pope Benedict tended to talk about, this celebration of the community, or self-celebration. And in general, you have a sort of a somewhat stable group of faithful that seem to come to Mass. Sometimes a lot of very full, but definitely diminished from the before what it had been in the past, for whatever reasons. People often have a sense they identify with this music. They said, this is who I am. This is the kind of music I do. And if somebody comes and does something different, it just doesn't quite seem to connect. If you try to change their habits, they often will, in my experience, there's often resentment because this is who we are.
And letters to the bishop, complaints.
Right.
This is the standard sort of parish council revolt scenario, I think.
Right. And I would say, I think as a general rule, most of these parishes are not thriving. They're diminishing little by little. And sometimes with some of the scandals going on recently, that's gone much quicker than it has before. So this is the next parish, and this is probably the most common situation that people find themselves in. So what do we do, David, in this?
Well, presumably it's similar to the thriving the first scenario.
That's right.
It's really painting the picture of the ideal, and then I'll let you. I'm going to come in and say here that once you have the diminishing attendance, that it's easier. I would say that very often the argument is one of being pastoral. We have to take into, if we take into account these people, this is what they're used to. We have to. Now, I would say, okay, in accordance with the principles that you've described, we should try and accommodate people. However, we have to be pastoral also to those who are not in the church.
Mm-hmm.
I just know from my own experience, this is the parish which I have never, ever been attracted to. I cringe when I go in it. I just find the whole experience virtually unbearable. Does not appeal to young. It's always very often done in the name of appealing to young people. And it's people who were young in the 1960s who are pushing this. It absolutely is not hitting home as they imagine. And I think at some point, there's going to be a battle there if the priest doesn't stick to his guns and the bishop doesn't support him. That's what you're facing. You adopt all the principles that you describe and try to be as charitable as possible, but at some point, unless there will be people who do not welcome this with open arms, I think.
That's right. And again, I think the first basic principle, as I mentioned earlier, is that of the humility, dignity, reverence, so to speak, that the priest brings to the Mass. That's, even though that's not enough, you might say, it really does have a very powerful effect.
Okay.
And I've seen that so many times in so many situations, almost to the point where you think, well, it almost overcomes the deficiencies in the music, because so that's the first step, again, is in the priest teaching the people about this as well and leading them. As you say, beyond that, I would say it's very similar to our first situation. Now, the resources aren't going to be as great in this typical parish. Won't have all this extra money to use, but still, strategically, one can find ways to introduce the parishioners to the beauty of something. And this is what I've seen before my eyes when we've had this opportunity in you might say, a typical parish, to introduce people to music that really does has this organic connection to the tradition. And when I do it, and when our Coram Chorale does it, it's always with a good deal of new music as well. People are really touched by it and moved by it, even if they had have a little exposure to that. That's my experience.
Yeah, and you're talking about new music in the spirit of the tradition.
That's right, David.
Yeah,
it's essential.
Yeah,
because that sort of goes back to our whole first set of podcasts, where we talked about all these different principles that need to inform the sacred music. Now, again, this is part of this strategic step-by-step process. And you mentioned the word pastoral, which is so important in the sense like the shepherd, the pastor, the shepherd, the good shepherd leads his sheep to the place they need to go. And he also needs to bring in the sheep that are outside of the fold.
Yes.
That takes courage, and it takes wisdom. So pastors are called to have this kind of pursuit of wisdom and fortitude, courage, that allow them then to shepherd, or to lead their flocks into this place that will benefit them and those outside the church. So
Okay.
is that enough on our typical parish for right now?
I think so. It seems to me from what you said that the only difference with the first one is it's going to be a little more difficult to present them with the ideal. You haven't got the resources to bring in this wonderful, to bring in the choir from St. John Cantius to do a demonstration or something.
Right.
So you have to be a little more inventive in how you introduce it and make use of the resources that you do have. But I think that essentially the problem is the same beyond that. It seems.
Yes, I think so. So the final parish I'd like to talk about, and again, I would like to invite anybody who has specific situations that seem not to fit into any of these examples. It's great to hear about different situations that seem challenging, but the final situation that I'm thinking about is where everything's basically in ruins. People are discouraged. They hardly have any music at all.
Yeah.
There's only a few people that come to Mass. What do you do in a situation like that? What can you do? And again, so many of the principles of it are important, but I think this is the kind of situation where you need the priest and those involved need to pray for the right people and look for they need to find those who are truly inspired by the vision of the church and are willing to share their talents. Most likely this will be amateurs in a parish like this that is really doesn't have much finances at all. But it's amazing sometimes how you can find these kind of people to help. And the amount that people are, because this is such an important issue, if the pastor is really has this vision and really is living a holy life and radiating that, it's quite often that this has the power to attract good people to the effort. And and what I want to say here too is that I want to get back to a point we made a while back in another podcast, is that essentially sacred music in the Catholic Church does not necessarily need to be grand or grandiose or big. It can still have its character in the most humble circumstances. Looking at, for example, Our Lady singing the Magnificat. Now, it doesn't say that she sang the Magnificat. It doesn't, the scripture doesn't say, but it seems like the whole structure of it lends itself to a song. And of course, we've sung the Magnificat throughout the centuries, but that first Magnificat was in a very humble situation. Our Lord, instituting the Eucharist, chanted the Passover and sang hymns with the apostles. You might say a very, very humble situation. Can anyone imagine a more beautiful, where would I rather go to experience the depths of sacred music than in these most humble situations? So I would assert that with the right people, and which is a big if, but that needs to be sought, great things can be done with very small resources. Can I give one more example here? I'd like to give one more example.
Yeah.
We were on a trip a few years back, and had a very, very difficult situation with one of our family members. Anyway, we were visiting we visited a local parish. There was a grand piano up in front, sort of what I would call almost cocktail piano music being played before the Mass.
Yeah.
We left. to find something else. We found a religious community that was chanting the Mass. It was reverent, but it seemed to lack some kind of life or inspiration. It was good. It was good. We were very grateful to be there. But interestingly, we went back to our motel room, and we were right next to a synagogue, and our open window opened up to the open door of the synagogue, and we heard a single person chanting the morning prayers in the morning. And you know that, no, I'm not advocating that we all go back to the synagogue. That's not my point. But this single person chanting the morning prayers had a certain authenticity and depth and connection to tradition that moved me in that moment, I could say, and inspired me more than all this other stuff that we had experienced. And I should say we also went to another place where this loudspeakers were sort of blaring in our ears as well. But the point I wish to make here, again, is not that we go back to the Jewish liturgy, but rather that that cantor that was singing that, or that person who was singing that morning prayer, exemplified some of the qualities we need in our Catholic liturgy, and that fundamentally we can do something of real value in very humble circumstances.
Well, and we go back to John Cantius, St. John Cantius, I think. I mean, that's really, it seems to me that when we think of that church in ruins, in a way, that's the nearest you'll get to a blank sheet of paper to work.
There you go.
What you need is the one or two allies in the congregation somewhere who can do what that you're describing that cantor did, assuming that it's not a performance that is people are unable to join in with. So we're assuming that everything else that you described, the resonance, the connection with people, all that is there. So appropriately, people can join in following this example. But really, you just need one or two of those people, and then it will change.
That's right.
And I'd love to know the story of the early days and how, what his first move was liturgically up in Chicago. But I imagine it would be something like that. He's looking, in a way, it's easier to deal with the church in ruins than it is the one that's in a state of managed decline, which is what churches are.
Exactly. Yeah. So that the ruins really do provide a marvelous opportunity.
Yeah.
With people.
From the ashes of disaster grow the roses of success, as they said in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I remember. Okay, I don't want to finish on the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Can we? I think we've finished there's no new theme to introduce at this point. Is there anything else?
Not that I can think of right now, David. I think we've covered a lot. And
okay, so really, just to remind you that this is Paul's mission, and with his Magnificat Institute, this is really what they're about. It's trying not only understanding what sacred music is, but understanding how to help people to introduce it in the situations that they are in. So Paul really does want to hear from you.
That's right.
Avail yourself of this service that's on offer. And once again, that's magnificatinstitute.org. So, Paul Jernberg, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David.
You've been listening to the Way of Beauty podcast, conversations on Catholic faith and culture. If you enjoyed this episode, then please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. This will help others to find it too. Also, if you're interested in delving more deeply into the material that we discuss, you can do a course at the Pontifex University website. That's pontifex.university.